Our Thank you, everyone. Our latest guest is Pat Lorusso. He is editor-in-chief and lead columnist at centerofleafsnation.com. They also do a blog, and they're available on social, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Pat, welcome to our show.
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me. Greatly appreciated.
Well, with the NHL, coming back in a couple of weeks, and most sports, kind of figuring out what, it will look like coming out of COVID-19 and this pandemic. I thought it would be good for you to come on here. You are a massive Leafs fan, clearly,
Yes.
and you've been a Leafs fan for years. And so when you started to do this, this blog, this website, this information hub for the Leafs, what were the reasons behind it?
So it actually came out of a really dark moment in my life. Back almost 6 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. Actually, funny enough, twice.
I laugh because it's crazy, not because you had cancer.
Yeah, no, it was a very dark time. So out of 2 cancer diagnoses, I just needed a healthy distraction from just the mental side of the diagnoses. And my brother would always tease me about how I would get into debates on like the Toronto Star website or Toronto Sun website with some of the writers. And he's like, "You're just so opinionated. Why don't you start a blog?" So the first maybe 6 to 8 months, it was just family and friends going. And then funny enough, I actually got a DM from an employee from the Score, Steve Coolius, who said, "Oh, wow, your stuff is really good. You really need to continue this." So then I started to take it more seriously. We then revamped the blog to its current format. And yeah, it's just been an interesting story. Each year we've actually doubled our traffic. Even with no hockey for all of 2020, we're probably about to reach our largest year, which is 20,000 visitors. So we've just been able to produce some really solid content. I was able to bring on 2 additional writers and co-hosts to our podcast as well, Anthony Sino and Lucas Ugenti. So they've been a really big help at growing our audience and being able to produce much more content.
And the best part is, without any hockey, we can pretend like the Leafs are actually doing well in June.
Yeah, I saw that smile in Dad's face there, Pat. As he was smiling, I knew he was going to say, "Hey, Dad, come." So.
Hey, listen, any self-respecting individual is a Maple Leafs fan. Now, I've already had parenting fail number 1 because my son happens to like the Montreal Canadiens, which causes a major issue in our house. In fact, though, here's how karma gets you. So my son really wanted to go see Carey Price play. So I got him tickets to go see Buffalo in Montreal. And it happened to be on March 16th, which is the day they canceled the season. So we got all the way to Montreal, and we couldn't watch it. And I said, "See, son, this is what happens when you're a Montreal Canadiens fan. You did this." That caused the entire shutdown of the season, right?
And his son's like 6 years old, so his son has a great trauma to deal with that. Now, Pat, you said, Pat, that you were coming out of a dark time. So can't get anyone getting that kind of diagnoses. So when you were told that you had cancer, what?
So it'll be almost six years ago. This upcoming July. I remember driving into. It's weird because it's one of those memories that will forever be ingrained in my memory. I remember getting up and driving into work and kind of feeling a little bit of discomfort in the lower region. Not quite putting it together as to what it was, but I was feeling like a sharp pain in my back and then in my groin area and then a little bit into my gut. But just was like, okay, maybe I tweaked something in the middle of the night, didn't think of it, went into work, started making some sales calls. And then at about noon, I couldn't even sit in my chair. I could barely breathe. The pain was just too, it was just unbearable.
So it was sudden that day? Was sudden that day? Was it really? Okay.
Yeah, that day. There was nothing leading up to it. It was just that morning. Everything kind of just came all together. So I kind of sensed where the pain was coming from.
Where was
so
the pain?
To the washroom. Pardon?
Where was the pain?
From the testicle, my right testicle.
Okay.
So then I went to the washroom and I did a self-exam. So I felt the one that was healthy, that wasn't shooting the pain. Didn't feel anything. Then I went to the one where the pain was starting from, and then I could feel the tumor. And I remember walking out of the stall, looking at myself in the mirror, saying, "Okay, I have cancer. I need to get myself to the hospital." So I
You
walked
knew
back.
you knew immediately, like that
Yeah, it was
morning.
just I could just feel the tumor. I felt something was there, and I knew based on the pain that something just wasn't right.
And no other time before that moment did you feel the tumor or any
No,
kind of discomfort in that area.
no. And the weird thing is, for a year leading up to that day, I was vomiting. Like I had just really bad stomach issues, and the doctors kept on saying that I had the celiac disease. So to just stick to being on a non-gluten diet, and it was weird because at times that would work, other times the vomiting would come back, but they couldn't pinpoint what was causing me to get sick.
Right.
So there was symptoms, just the doctors and myself just couldn't put it together.
Right.
So then going up to my sales manager and saying, "Hey, I have to go to the hospital." He's looking at me going like, "What's wrong?" I was like, I don't know just yet. But I have an inkling of what it might be. But let me get to the hospital and I'll call you once I know. So this is where my story gets really funny. I don't mean to make light of my cancer diagnosis, but it's like it's like so me, and Will, you've known me for now over 20 years. You kind of know how I deal with certain situations. So I walked into the hospital, and the lady took my health card and she's like, "Mr. Lorusso, what's wrong?" I was like, "I have testicular cancer. How about you?" And she kind of looked at me.
All right.
She kind of looked at me with this weird look on her face saying, "You know what, Mr. Lorusso, look, you shouldn't be self-diagnosing yourself. Let's get you in, let's get you looked at, and we'll go from there." So they call my name. I go into the room. The doctor comes in. "Mr. Russo, what is wrong?" I was like, once again, like I told the lady that took my health card, I think I have, or I'm pretty sure that I have testicular cancer. What are the next steps? So she's like, "Well, before I can even diagnose you," she's like, "you seem to have done a pretty good job yourself. But she's like, before I can diagnose you, we need to get an X-ray done to kind of see what it is that's causing you this discomfort." And the radiologist, I'm not sure if he should have been doing this, but he did it. The monitor was actually tilted so I could actually see it. So when he was doing the scan, I actually saw the tumor. And what had happened was the tumor had ruptured, and that's what was causing me the pain. So the one area was full of black because that's where the blood was from the ruptured tumor.
All right. So then so as soon as you found out, so this is now the same day in the afternoon, what was the next course of action taken?
So once again, this is part 2 of the humor of the story. Believe it or not, I ended up going to see the urologist the following day, the hospital's urologist. The hospital will remain nameless because there's probably some issues with how this went about, but we'll just chalk it up as some humor. So I walk into the urologist's office, and he says to me, "You know what, Mr. Russo, we can confirm, you do have testicular cancer." And I was like, "Okay, well, what are the next steps? Like, what do I do?" And he's like, "I'm about to go to my cottage for a couple of weeks. Can you wait? Because we need to do surgery." And I'm like, okay, I'm looking at my wife, and we're looking at each other, and like my face, I was ready to just kill this guy. Because I was like, just the pain alone was like, I couldn't do it for an additional 2 weeks. And the fact that he just told me I had cancer, it seemed like it had to be done right away.
And he's going to his cottage.
So this
That's crazy.
he was having me to rush off to his cottage. So I said to him, I was like, "Look, if you can spot me in, I'll even take like your last appointment the next day." So I would have been the Tuesday. I'm like, "I'll take your last appointment on the Wednesday. Let's just get it done. Let's get it over with." So then he sent me home, called me back within probably about an hour and a half, and said, "Hey, you know what? We're able to get you an emergency appointment. So come in to the hospital the next day." And they did the surgery.
What was it? So they removed the ball or removed the tumor?
Yeah,
what?
they removed the testicle. Wow. It was too badly damaged. And yeah, so that was it. It had to go. There was nothing that they could do to save it. It wasn't worth saving. So yeah.
And so with that, then so after the surgery happened, was there any radiation? What happened after that?
There was no subsequent treatment. It was just remove the tumor. Then I was monitored fairly regularly to see, if it was going to come back. And then I was connected with my main oncologist at Princess Margaret.
Okay.
Dr. Hamilton. He was phenomenal. But then things were going well, so we weren't really checking up on it. And then in and around late August, early September of 2014, I started getting sick again with my stomach, vomiting again. I was supposed to go to a wedding, and I was cleaning myself up to head out to the wedding, and I started to vomit. I filled up the entire sink in my washroom. The bathtub was covered. I couldn't stop. And that's what scared me. So once again, we chalked it up to, well, no one told us that it might come back and what the reoccurring rate was. So we didn't think anything of it. We thought maybe, I had eaten something that was bad. About 3 weeks after that, I woke up in the middle of the night with back pain. Couldn't walk, couldn't breathe. Had to be essentially carried to the car by my wife. We went into the hospital. The doctor asked me what was going on. I explained to him what the pain was, and then he looked at me and he said, "Do you have any pre-existing conditions?" And I said, "Well, about 4 months ago, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer." And his face went completely white. And he said, "You're going upstairs. We're doing a full body scan." So I go up, do the full body scan, come back down, and he looked at me. He's like, "Well, your cancer's back, and it's now in your abdomen. We found at least 2 tumors.
Wow.
We need to get you into surgery." So we linked back up with my oncologist at Princess Margaret. And then in November 24th of 2014, I was in and I got completely cut open. So I'm essentially cut from just below my chest bone right down to my groin. It took about 57 staples to close me back up, but they had to go into my abdomen to pull out the 2 tumors.
And then, Dan, any questions so far?
No, I am just listening here.
It's fascinating. And so then, after that second surgery, so you've had 2 cancer surgeries in a matter of 5 months.
Yeah, 5 to 6 months. Yeah.
Yeah. So after this second cancer surgery, was there chemo? Was there radiation?
No, but I did develop some complications after the second surgery. My body started to develop liquid outside of my organs, and they couldn't figure out what that was or what was causing it. It could have just been like a part of the process of my body healing. Who knows? When your organs are on a table beside you, things kind of get shifted around, so things happen. So I ended up.
What was your state of mind during this whole time? What was your state of mind? Because you hear.
I just wanted to get out of the hospital. It was weird. All I wanted to do was get back to work. For me, I went into action mode. It was okay, heal, get back to work, deal with the emotional stuff later. And I'll get to the emotional stuff later. But yeah, it was just, I needed to get back, needed to get healthy. Before my second surgery, I was told that the recovery would have been 5 days. I ended up spending almost 2 weeks in the hospital. I had lost about 25 pounds. I looked like skin and bones when I finally got back. Because they stopped feeding me because they thought it was the food that was making me build up all this liquid and vomiting, only to realize it was just part of the healing process. And then once I started to eat again, I was strong enough to get back home.
Okay. So you said you want to, oh, sorry, Dan, yeah?
No, I just said, wow, that's a lot to go through in 5 months.
Isn't that crazy?
It was nuts. And
people complain about this pandemic. It makes no sense.
No, and you go in, so I don't know what it was about me, and I'm sure it's probably just in intrinsic in all humans, but I went into action mode right away. I didn't even deal with the cancer diagnosis until after my second surgery, mentally and emotionally. It literally took me to have 2 surgeries and then the downtime to be like, holy crap, I just got diagnosed with cancer twice.
Right.
Because I never processed that portion. The emotional stuff was buried. I was just worried about getting well and getting back home and getting back to work. And it was funny because it was once I got back to work and on my commute that I realized that I had so much emotional baggage that I never dealt with.
Right.
And I would start crying on the subway, like in a panic. So good thing that, when you go through that, they set you up on a 5-year survival plan. At least Princess Margaret did. And part of my first year was getting mental health services, only to deal with the 2 diagnoses. There was some survivor guilt as well, because a couple of years earlier, I had lost a really good friend of mine to cancer. My cousin had lost his wife to cancer in around the same time. So there was some survival guilt as to why I made it and two people that were dear to me didn't. So they helped me cope through that. But it was the emotional stuff that weighed heavier on me than the actual physical stuff.
Right. Right. Yeah. Amazing. Like that has no words. Which
I have no words. I just that's unbelievable.
yeah, it's a ridiculous story. But then coming out of that 6 months of horror,
Yes.
you decided to focus now on your passions because you have one life, right, Pat? One life.
Exactly.
Live it well.
No, exactly. And that's where the blog started. And
Right.
it was a lot of work. And it, like I said, it became a really positive distraction for me. And then to get the instant feedback, like within less than a year, I was getting people in the industry reaching out saying, hey, keep it up. Great work. They were starting to like my stuff, retweeting my stuff, leaving comments. So now we're about 4 years into the blog. About a year and a half ago, we started the podcast.
Right.
And we've been able to land some really, really big guests this past year. So that it's just been, I can't believe the growth. We went from having about 800 visitors that last quarter of 2016, and we're on target to hit probably over 20,000 visitors this year alone.
Right, because I don't know, Dan, if you had time to go on to the site, but there's the site and the blogs. I've listened to a couple of the episodes. You did recently cover some, I'm not gonna say controversial topics, but topics of relevance, we'll say.
Yeah.
With Mark Frazier, when it comes to sports and the whole racism or black people in sports, whatever you want to call it, and why are you approaching? I think you're approaching it a little differently. Why do you feel it's important to talk about topics that are relevant to what's going on in the world?
Because there's no hockey. It allows us to actually talk about the stories within the sport.
Right.
And growing up, you do have, being a white person, obviously you do have a certain sense of privilege that you don't realize what some of these athletes are going through.
Yes.
You start learning some of the stories and just talking to Mark Frazier and learning about what it was like for him to play. And I think his first incident with racism happened when he was like 11, and someone in the fans, a parent, while he was sitting in the penalty box, told him to go back to the jungle, I think was the actual comment. And it really took a step back, and you begin to realize that sport is no different than regular life. Racism exists in every corner of the planet, and I thought that it was as good of a time as anything to bring up those types of not really controversial topics, but important topics.
Important, yeah.
Because people take it for granted. We just assume that these players, once they get into the NHL, that their lives have been great and they haven't had to face any adversity. And then you start reading up on Mark Frazier and Evander Kane and a few of the other black players, and their lives going through hockey and becoming an NHL player weren't so rosy. And those stories needed to be told. And what better time now than the fact that there is no other topics stealing people's attention. Let's talk about things that are important.
And I'm sure all those players have gone through quite a bit of stuff growing up, because hockey's a predominantly in the past has been a predominantly white sport. So they've probably had a number of trials and tribulations that they've had to go through, playing in little arenas out in the middle of nowhere where fans are right on top of you. I've gone to minor league games, and I listen to what the fans say to the referees and to themselves. I can only imagine if they start to pick on the race card, what ends up happening. My God.
Yeah, it gets really ugly. And that's one of the things that we learned in our interview with Mark. Like, I actually walked away from that interview going, we need to change it. Like, that was just my original thought after that interview. We have to do something. We've been able to remain in contact with Mark. The hope is that in the fall, we'll be able to have him back on when he launches his new project. So we've just been able to maintain that. And you know what? I don't mind losing followers if they're going to take a stance they don't necessarily agree with Mark or some of our other guests. Like, we had Dan Carcillo on, who discussed mental health and why fighting needs to be out of hockey. We lost some followers there, but I don't care. I'd rather produce content that when I look back 10, 15 years from now is people can look back at it, he was right or they were correct. I don't need to be popular. I think popularity is fleeting, but I think if you produce good content and you produce content that people can relate to and you can educate them, I think that's more valuable than having 20,000 followers on Twitter. The number doesn't matter. And I think that watching our audience grow year after year continues to signify that we're on the right path of what we're doing.
Right, because you also interviewed Leo Routens as well, and he sort of touched on this issue, but other issues as well. You know, and I don't want to surprise you guys, but I'm Black, and I think it's important that there's conversations that are happening, and certainly everyone is allowed to have their own opinion on it. But I've always said this, that it's important that the people that have lived through a situation speak to it. And I think, if anyone saw the Dave Chappelle, 28-minute comedy special on YouTube that he put out 2 weeks ago, he is correct in stating that, it's important that right now that the people that have actually lived with racism or through racism are the ones that to speak to it, because everyone's experience in life is different. I think about the NASCAR news thing that happened over maybe last week. And it's just, again, people are just, people reacting to what's happening in the world. And I think hopefully with what's going on, that something good will come out of this. And that's the hope, right? The hope is that everyone should be treated as humans, and every human should be treated equally the same, no matter what your skin color is at all. And that's that's how it should be.
And most definitely, and it actually touches on, given that this month is Pride Month. We had back last month, or even the month before, Brock McGillis, who discussed, the importance for hockey to be more inclusive to gay athletes and gay players. And that was another topic. Once again, we lost some followers, but we gained much more integrity. And I'd rather offer platforms to stories like these and not feel like I have to impress everyone just by softball interviews, softball blogs, just to appease everyone. I think I need to use my platform for something bigger. And we're doing that. So,
and to think about, the fact that now there are people that reflect the population playing in the NHL's biggest issue in the States for their ratings is the fact that their league does not reflect the population of the United States or the majority of the world, right? So it's important that the NHL and NFL and every major sports organization understand the value of treating people like it's you could be a gay athlete, whatever, but at the end of the day, we're humans, and the people who see themselves in a league, they'll watch it. They'll, as a child, will get into it younger. You'll get a more diverse mix of people playing in that league. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from all this is that, again, it's not about black and white, gay or straight. It's about humans being allowed to be treated the same and to play a sport at the same level as any other human.
Yeah, most definitely. And that's where I think hockey fails when you look at the other major sports, especially in the United States, and why their TV deal isn't as large.
Right.
When you look at sports like NBA, baseball, it's reflective of their audience. There's Black, there's Latino, there's white. It covers a wide range. So if you're new to the United States and you turn on a baseball game or you watch a basketball game, you can see someone that looks like you or that has a lot of cultural similarities to you. So you begin to want to watch that sport further. Hockey is very limited in that, and that was actually one of the topics that when we had Mark Frazier and even Brock McGillis on, that's what we brought up. How do we make hockey begin to reflect the audience, and that would help grow the game, especially in the United States where there's markets that are probably underserved. And I think Austin Matthews broke through a wall. He was one of the more high-profile Latino players because his mom is Mexican. We do need more of that diversity in the game. I think that will only help to grow it and make it more sustainable as it moves forward into the future.
But in order to do that, though, you have to make it more economically viable for bigger groups of populations, right? Like, it's not even just a race color issue. You're only getting elite people in there because they're the ones that can afford to pay the $10,000 a year for their kids to play.
Right.
Well, and that's another thing that we looked at was, what can ground roots organizations do to make it more affordable? Do we go back to the arenas and saying, why are you overcharging these leagues so much? Because all those costs go down to the parent. And you look at the cost of like hockey equipment. Like all the kids want what their NHL stars and role models are using, and these sticks cost
Oh, Pat, you're muted.
Uh-oh. It's
Oh,
coming.
there you go.
Back. There you go.
So there needs to be a full 360 review, especially at the grassroots level, to make the game more affordable.
I didn't fall for that. See, my son wanted to start playing, so I put him into this Learn to Play program, and they tried to sell me $100 stick. This kid can't even stand up to shoot the puck yet, so I got him the $15 Sherwood wood one with a straight-ass blade on it, and that's what he still plays with it to this day, and now his third year, and he can still shoot with it, right? Like, try to get these kids into all this stuff early on, that it's ridiculous. Now, a friend of mine, he signed his kid up for a hockey program that Rob Pearson was affiliated with through the Maple Leafs, and they provided all the gear for the kids.
Which is better,
right?
Yeah.
And I think that if you want to make something like hockey a little more viable, they need to start partnering with these organizations a lot more to get this stuff down into the kids' hands where they can get their equipment and all of their other costs free. So that way, at least if the rinks are going to charge what they're charging, at least you're not paying. Like my son wanted me to start playing, so I went into them to the shop and I just checked out what some of the adult gear looked like. And if he thinks that I'm going to pay like $2,000 to get dressed up so I can suck at a sport, it's not going to happen, right? Because even just for me, like to buy shin pads and the pants and everything else, it would, even using used gear, it would cost me probably close to $1,000 to get everything. Whereas to play soccer, I played soccer for 30 years, I can go grab a $100 pair of shoes and a $20 ball and some $15 shin pads, and I'm ready to play.
Yeah.
And I can play at any level around. Right? Same with basketball. I go buy my shoes, we can pick some kids up in the court, and we can go play basketball. Right? Baseball is the same thing. Hockey is one of those sports, and golf is another one that has the same problem. Like if you want to get started in golf, that's going to cost you an awful lot of money.
Yes.
Right?
No,
and the diversity in golf reflects that too.
Companies like Reebok, Nike, Adidas need to help out, especially at the grassroots level. Just knowing that there is that need. They need to come up with a program, maybe help some of these local leagues, with some of those equipment necessities, just to widen the net. Because you never know, could we be losing out on the next Wayne Gretzky or the next Eric Lindros because that child can't play? It would be devastating to know that we've lost an athlete to another sport, because I love hockey personally, because that person couldn't afford to play the game. Like, that would just be really disappointing. And
I'm sure we already have.
And I'm sure we have. You're probably right.
We already have.
We definitely have.
So, Pat, we have you for a couple more minutes, right? Or you have to go?
Yeah, no, a couple more minutes.
Now, with NHL returning in a couple weeks with this playoff 5, best of 5, whatever thing they're doing, how do you see the NHL coming out of this pandemic, and how will it look?
So they've already announced the 2014 playoff. The first round will be a play-in. The top 4 teams, I think, will have like a round robin just to kind of get their legs warmed up. But then the other teams will have to play in to make it into the playoffs.
Right.
I like the format. I think given the fact that COVID has dropped a bomb on everyone, to kind of see the NHL be a little bit more creative with what they're going to do this year, it sounds like a fun thing. It's something new. I doubt it's going to continue next year, but for 1 year where, no one could have imagined the season ending in March, and I don't know. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to watching the Leafs play Columbus in the first round. That'll be an interesting series.
But no crowds, right? It'll be empty stadium.
It'll be an empty stadium. It looks like Toronto is the front runner to be the hub for the Eastern Conference. That seems to be where things are pointing, and Vegas will be the hub for all the Western Conference teams.
Okay. Well,
I don't like it, Willard. I don't like it.
Why?
I think they should have just canceled the season. All these companies, all these sports leagues now are just trying to do it because they need money. So they're trying to rush all this stuff together, get it thrown together so we can have, like me personally, I love hockey and I love the Maple Leafs, but I do not want to sit on my porch in July and start watching hockey again. I already hate it when it runs into the first week of June. I like my hockey to be during my winter season. If it can't be, cut it off. And they should have just waited, let this whole thing be done with. Like, to me, 2 months ago, we were super worried about all this COVID stuff that's going on. Now, all of a sudden, you get people getting tested. Tampa Bay shuts down their thing because they had a few people test positive.
Right.
Well, now, 2 weeks, a week and a half later, it's back up and running. So why even shut down in the first place? right? You got a whole bunch of Leafs players that are testing positive, or no, Blue Jays players that are testing positive at their spring training. But all these companies now, they got TV deals and they're advertising, and all this stuff is coming up that all of a sudden the greater public good is now being thrown on the back burner so these multimillionaires can continue to make money.
I'm glad that with baseball, for instance, it's a 60 game. I mean, baseball's too long. It's 166 games, that's too many games. 60 games?
Yeah, they can cut it down. Baseball could cut down a quarter of its season and have the playoffs sooner. I think the major issue with hockey, though, is because they're generally a gate-driven league. Their TV deal really isn't as rich as the other major sports. So for them to have to give back some of that TV deal because they stopped playing, I think would hurt the league. With a salary cap as well, a hard cap, there really hasn't been much flexibility in that. So I think that's why the NHL is pushing for the hub-style format. I don't see hockey starting until late August. I think it'll be like an August, September, maybe early October will be where the Stanley Cup final kind of will kind of happen. And then there'll be a month or two off, quote unquote, off season. And I don't see the NHL coming back till maybe middle of December, January for the commencement of next season. But I just think there was just far too many financial pressures on the NHL, unlike the other leagues where they're sitting pretty with maybe their TV deals. The NHL just couldn't afford to just be shut down.
And you're absolutely right. But there's a lot of small businesses around North America that are feeling a lot of financial pressures during this, right? And they're not getting the opportunity to say, like, our wonderful prime minister, I'm not even going to get into that part of it, but he's like, oh yeah, we're prime minister be coming across the border for sports league teams coming in, right? Like, that drives me nuts to no end that they get these special measures, and a regular business that could really use reopening last month, they can't do it because we have to worry about everybody catching this disease. Like that, it blows my mind.
I think given the fact that you're not going to see players crossing the border if they haven't been tested, and then they'll be quarantined before they do. And at least that's what was talked about in the past, where every player before even entering, like, let's just say Toronto does become the hub city, no one's coming into Toronto without a clean bill of health. And then you have to assume that they're going to have food catered into whatever hotel they're going to be in. I'm hoping that the players will stay isolated. Really, there's nothing for them to do during the day anyways. If they wanted to leave the hotel where they'll be staying. And maybe that helps the hotels get some money that they've lost. Like, I know the tourism industry is taking a big hit as well. Maybe some of the local restaurants that might be supplying these teams with food will have another revenue source, so the restaurants can earn some additional money. And it's going to be hard. I don't think anyone could have planned for this. And I just think that we're all just kind of operating off, the seat of our pants at this point. Because I don't think have we ever seen anything this big? Like, when was the last pandemic? What, 1918, I think?
I don't know, but I'll tell you what. This would be the perfect year for the Maple Leafs to win the Stanley Cup and then not be able to have a parade.
We're going to be having this conversation in October, and it's going to be the most anticlimactic Leafs parade in ever. They would not have won the cup in over 60 years, or about 50 years, sorry. And there's no parade.
Yeah.
Like, that would be so Leaf-esque.
What's the point of a parade, really?
It would be
get some cameras on them and have them walk down the street. Like, people line, like the last year the Raptors won. The millions of people, like, what are you trying to see? Who are you seeing?
I think the trophy. I think there's something. I don't know, just to be able to have the.
I've never gotten parades
for the Raptors.
It's just the fact of being there, Willard.
Yeah.
I was able to watch it on television in the comfort of my own home. That was amazing.
See, I was at a bar when the Raptors won, and I will never forget that experience. I was actually at a friend's bar on Queen West called The Counselor, watching the Raptors win, and then looking around and seeing people. And once again, let's get back to the whole current situation that we find ourselves in. Everyone's fighting with one another, but then that evening, sports can actually transcend a lot of the cultural issues and the racial issues that we're seeing. Just seeing people of all different cultures, races, celebrating one common goal that was achieved. So I really do think it's kind of nice. Sports is definitely a good distraction if it can be done properly and safely, and hopefully the Leafs can give us an anticlimactic parade come October.
Hey, I remember years ago, we jumped in a car and went down to Yonge Street, and that was for a Game 7 win over Ottawa in the first round.
Yeah, that was, it's one of the, I was on Corso Italia when Italy won their last World Cup, and watching hundreds of thousands of people walking along Corso Italia celebrating the Italian soccer win.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that. No,
the World Cup is also canceled, right? Or postponed?
That's also canceled. Yeah.
Okay.
And the Summer Olympics is pushed out at best till next year.
That's right.
I'm German, and the Italians beat us in Germany for the World Cup. They knocked us out. We're not going to talk about that.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Pat. Very insightful. Again, Pat Lorusso of centerofleafsnation.com. You can find him on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook,
Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get all your podcasts, we're there as well.
Perfect. So again, thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Yes, much appreciated. Your story's amazing. And again, guys, you can go to their website, centerofleafsnation.com for the latest podcasts and blog entries. Thank you, Pat.
Thanks
a lot, Pat. It was fun.
Cheers.